'Tis the season to shine with H&M. Discover the holiday collection and find fashionable pieces for your wardrobe or for under the tree. Get inspired and dazzle with this year's glam. From tuxedo styles, bow detailed pieces, impressive prints, and more. From unforgettable looks to unforgettable gifts. With fashion finds to home decor, find it all at H&M. Treat your loved ones and yourself this season. Shop in-store or at hm.com.
This episode is brought to you by Vital Farms. Isn't it bullshit to have to question where your food comes from? At Vital Farms, you can trace your pasture-raised eggs all the way back to the source, the pasture. On the side of each pasture-raised carton of eggs, you'll find the name of the farm where your eggs were laid. And when you look the farm up on their website, you'll get a peek at all the sunshine, fresh air, and open space the hens enjoy. Learn more and find out where to buy them at vitalfarms.com. Vital Farms, keeping it bullshit-free.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. That's the sound of switching your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling. Harness the best converting checkout and same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Stop leaving sales on the table. Discover why millions trust Shopify to build, grow, and run their business. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech23.
This episode is brought to you by Kia's first 3-row all-electric SUV, the Kia EV9, with available all-wheel drive and seating for up to 7 adults, with a 0 to 60 speed that thrills you 1 minute, and available reclining lounge seats that unwind you the next. Visit kia.com/EV9 to learn more. Ask your Kia dealer for availability. No system, no matter how advanced, can compensate for all driver error and or driving conditions. Always drive safely.
'Twas the first night home for the holidays, and all through your town, not one thumb was quiet, a lot of swiping going down. You created the perfect Bumble profile with care, in hopes that your dream guy or gal may be out there. When what to your wandering eyes should appear but a ton of faces you haven't seen in years. There's a rando from high school, your ex from 8th grade, a kid you used to babysit, and your literal Uncle Dave. As cringe as this feels, the only thing worse would be if one of them stumbled upon your profile first. But there's no need to panic or erase your face from the app. You can go incognito with one simple tap. Disappear from the others till you say they're a match, and have more fun finding your next hometown catch. With peace of mind and your profile hidden from sight, happy holidating to all, and to all a good night. Happy holidating with incognito mode from Bumble. Download today.
Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast? Please subscribe, leave a review, comment, share, and consider supporting the podcast on Patreon, even at the producer and sponsorship levels. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I share my recent conversation with Hannah Michelle on her podcast, where we discuss the talent crisis as an opportunity.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hannah Talks Hiring. Today with us, we have John Westover. Welcome, John.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, we're so excited to have you on the show today. If you don't know John, He's a pretty cool dude, and I have a few things that I want to say about him here before we start. So John is the #1 ranked HR, innovation, and future of work global thought leader and influencer by Thinkers 360. He's also the host and producer of the popular Human Capital Innovations podcast, which I had the pleasure of checking out yesterday for a little bit, and I found the content very valuable and great. He's the chair and professor of organizational leadership and change in the Woodbury School of Business at UVU and the academic director of the UVU Center for Social Impact, which is awesome. And he received his bachelor's and master's degree from Brigham Young University, his doctorate from the University of Utah, and he's been published widely in academic journals, books, magazines, and in popular media locally, nationally, and abroad, such as Forbes, The Economist, the U.S. News and World Report, the Wall Street Journal, just to name a few. John, is there anything else you'd like to add that you would feel that you feel is important for listeners to know?
Well, I really appreciate that kind introduction. And on a personal note, I'm a proud father of 6 children, and I've been married to my wife for almost 20 years. And so I consider myself a father, husband, and family man first and foremost, and am fortunate enough to have a job and a career that's afforded me a lot of flexibility and autonomy to pursue things I'm interested in while devoting time and energy and priority towards my family.
That is awesome and so great to hear. 6 kids. Wow.
'Twas the first night home for the holidays, and all through your town, not one thumb was quiet. A lot of swiping going down. You created the perfect Bumble profile with care in hopes that your dream guy or gal may be out there. When what to your wandering eyes should appear but a ton of faces you haven't seen in years. There's a rando from high school, your ex from 8th grade, a kid you used to babysit, and your literal Uncle Dave. As cringe as this feels, the only thing worse would be if one of them stumbled upon your profile first. But there's no need to panic or erase your face from the app. You can go incognito with one simple tap. Disappear from the others till you say they're a match, and have more fun finding your next hometown catch. With peace of mind and your profile hidden from sight, happy holidating to all, and to all a good night. Happy holidating with incognito mode from Bumble. Download today.
This episode is brought to you by Klaviyo, the platform that powers smarter digital relationships. With Klaviyo, you can activate all your customer data in real time, connect seamlessly with your customers across all channels, guide your marketing strategy with AI-powered insights, recommendations, and automated assistance. Deliver experiences that feel individually designed at scale and grow your business faster. Power smarter digital relationships with Klaviyo. Learn more at klaviyo.com/Spotify. That's KLAVIYO.com/Spotify.
Yeah, they keep us on our toes.
I bet they do. I have 2 boys and they keep me on my toes. I do not have 6. Probably a good thing for me. All right. So, John, I'd love to just jump in here with having you start by sharing your thoughts on the current evolution of the labor market, how you think we got here, and where we could potentially be headed in the future when it comes to the development of the workforce and the hiring ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And it's a fluid question, really, because things are constantly changing around us. And I would say, prior to COVID 2 years ago, if you asked me the same question, I probably would have said many of the same things, only I feel like we've moved so far forward so quickly, far faster than I think we would have if the pandemic hadn't have hit. So the trends in the labor force and in the nature of work had already been taking us in the direction of more automation, not just with robots in a factory setting or that kind of thing, but in terms of AI, machine learning, deep learning, those sorts of things, displacing a lot of tasks, a lot of the types of skills that jobs may have had as a core part of their functioning in the past, displacing perhaps even entire jobs. And that trajectory has been happening for the last, decade at least. I mean, really, we're in in the throes of what has been called the fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution. And so we just see a dramatic shift happening because of these disruptive innovations. So that was already happening. What was also already happening was this continual kind of shifting of what is called in the academic literature as the psychological contract within the workplace. So what that means is kind of this unspoken understanding between employer and employee about the nature of work and how the two interface. So you go back 50 years and the psychological contract was such that many, in fact, really most people, they would go through whatever schooling they were going to go through. And then they would go to an organization to work, usually start at the lower rungs, entry level, and then they'd stay there. They'd stay there either for a really long time or perhaps for their entire career, and they would move up the rungs. And that psychological contract was dual loyalty between the employer and the employee, and both wanted it that way. And the employer would obviously provide the pay and the benefits, as well as the career development and opportunities for advancement and those sorts of things. The employee would come and do the work and contribute to the organization. And over time, over the last several decades, that has continually eroded and shifted away from that kind of more traditional, what I'll call the traditional psychological contract, into really what we see today, where there's not much of any real ongoing commitment or loyalty in most organizations between, the employer and the employee. And so you see a lot of shifting on the employer side, going towards a more contingent workforce that gives them more flexibility. They're not as locked into labor costs, and so they can be more agile and adaptive. On the employee side, looking, to career job hop different organizations to move up in their career and advance in their career. And the average employee, the average tenure for an employee at an organization has dropped dramatically over the last several decades to now, millennial and Gen Z individuals will shift jobs rapidly. Now that's not, I'm talking in generality. So obviously there's some organizations that still foster a lot of commitment and loyalty, that really invest in their people and want their people to stick around. And there are employees that want the same thing. So that still exists, but it's much more uncommon now to hear of someone who basically, out of high school or out of college goes to an organization, spends the next 40 years of their career moving up in that organization. That's a pretty rare kind of a story in this day and age. So all of those shifts were happening leading up to the pandemic, and pretty much everyone in the realm of the future of work, trying to look around the corner and see what might be happening. Most people predicted within the next 10, 15 years that we would see a continued shift towards the breakdown of the psychological contract, a greater shift towards more contingent work, part-time work, gig work in the gig economy, as well as increasing automation and utilization of AI, machine learning, and other disruptive technologies in the type of work we do, so that many jobs would be displaced, many new jobs would be created, many new careers even would be created, over the course of, maybe a decade or two. What the pandemic has done is it's just accelerated us into that change. It's taken us, with that existing momentum and trajectory, most organizations that weren't, on the, boots on the ground, first frontline worker types of organizations, where you had to have people physically there in the workplace. Most other organizations, on a dime almost, shifted towards virtual work. And even those who had been pretty reticent to do so, even those leaders in those organizations that really were skeptical about virtual work, weren't sure how to make it work, how to do things like performance management and culture and those sorts of things in a virtual environment, they really had no choice. They had to just shift and figure it out. And now we're close to 2 years into it, and people have largely figured it out. And so what would have probably taken us another 5 to 10 years in terms of shift towards comfort level with the technologies and more virtual work or even hybrid work, happened over the span of a year, 18 months. Now some are shifting back, some are trying to shift more towards hybrid work, but the reality is a shift has changed and you can't put that genie back in the bottle. People have tasted what it's like to have the flexibility and the autonomy and the opportunity to do work when it suits them in their schedule. And it's part of the reason why we see, this great resignation happening, the great awakening really of people just recognizing that maybe what they took for granted previously, pre-pandemic, as the nature of work and what they should expect from their organization and what their experience in the workplace would be, they've realized that there's no reason why they have to accept that anymore. And they have options and they can fight for the flexibility. They can fight for the virtual work. And so we see organizations wrestling with that. Sorry, that was a really long-winded answer to that initial question.
No, that is all right. Thank you so much for that valuable insight. I loved how you called it the Great Awakening instead of the Great Resignation, or you addressed it like that. I think that is really interesting and so true. I'm curious to know what you think about, so you mentioned the psychological contract. As I have been learning more about this and been steeped in the work of sourcing and hiring, it seems to me that I want to talk maybe about a different type of contract. I don't know if this is the same as the psychological contract you're addressing, but in the past, the contract has been much more perhaps transactional between the employee and the employer. For example, I am buying your services as an employee and you are selling me your talent and your time. But now with the nature of virtual work, hybrid work, gig work, and all of these things that are disrupting the workforce and contributing to the different ways that people design their lives, I feel like it's much more now about an employer designing a job of value and how they sell that to possible or potential talent. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. And the way I would frame what you're saying is employee experience. There's a real emphasis right now on the employee experience within the organization. So that includes things like job design. That includes things like the organizational culture, how engaging it is, how hierarchical or flat the organizational structure is, and a lot of those types of things that create the context around which we do our work, right? And because people have woken up to, and are more willing now, perhaps than they were a couple of years ago, to really question the norms around their organizational life and their work life, they're willing to take a second look at that and say, no, it doesn't need to be that way. Why do we need to do it that way? Why do we have to have all these meetings? Why do we have to be in person? Why do we have to do this, that? Challenging everything, right? Because people are more willing to do that now, it's forced, in my opinion, it's forced organizations that perhaps got a little lackadaisical or, really not paying proper attention to this, the holistic employee experience in the workplace. And especially, when the labor market isn't so tight, when the employers have plenty of applicants, it's, you can understand where they're coming from. Like, they don't have to try as hard because lots of people want to work for them. But right now, the situation is such that if you want to attract and retain really great people, especially in this environment where people are really questioning everything and questioning why are we doing things this way? If you want to attract and retain great people in this environment, you have to just be really laser focused on the employee experience, so that value proposition that you bring as an employer, as an organization, to the job candidate, and really through the whole process of recruitment and hiring, onboarding, all the way through, the different elements of the organization. That needs to be stronger. That needs to be more positive. We need to have a psychologically safe environment, an inclusive environment, an innovative culture that fosters creativity, where people feel free to speak up and speak out if they notice something that seems like it's not right, or they question a decision. Like, those things have to be in place. And if they're not, people are voting with their feet and they're going to other organizations. Right. Now, I'm a big believer that, the grass is not always greener. And so just because I'm experiencing something that's not ideal in my current organization, that doesn't mean I'm magically going to be able to just hop to the next job and find it. Like, these are all the things we've been mentioning. These are the types of things that pretty much every organization wrestles with and struggles with. Some do better than others, but everyone's wrestling with these things. And so I also, I want people to do what's right for them and for their family. And if something's not working in your current job, by all means, go look for another opportunity. But I'm also a believer in people trying to lift where they stand and make their current situation the best it possibly can be and make the contributions they can. So if you see a problem, try to be the change you want to see in the organization and be a leader that way. I think that can also contribute to the type of positive environment that we're talking about. And part of that positive employee experience.
Absolutely. I love that. Have you noticed in your work, possibly with companies, whether that's advising or consulting or other HR departments that you've been involved with, have you noticed that this huge shift is hard for HR specifically to move through because of perhaps the tendency to be really steeped in things like best practices and traditions, and to be really safe in the way that they go about implementing policy and procedure, which are all, of course, good things. But have you noticed that it's made it perhaps more difficult to innovate?
Yeah, it depends on the organization. This 2-year period has been really interesting in that regard, because you see vastly different types of reactions and responses from organizations depending on their existing culture and how ready and adaptive and agile they are in the current context. And I've seen lots of organizations that more or less are like, they've tried to double down. They've tried to put more policies and restrictions in place. They've tried to, honestly, it's not very charitable in terms of how I'm describing this, but, finding more and more ways to micromanage their people in this environment, because they're worried. They're worried, like, what does it look like to have a virtual workforce now? And their response is, we're going to micromanage you and we're going to monitor everything. And we're going to have all these extra rules and requirements in place. That's a fear-based kind of a response. I've seen plenty of that. And honestly, that, getting back to the employee experience, if that's been the organization's way of responding to this current situation, they're not going to keep their best people, because people are fed up with that. But you've had other organizations that have really leaned into it and they've embraced it. And it really should be the time for HR to shine, for HR departments, more, HR as a discipline, as a profession, has been fighting and scratching and clawing, trying to get its seat at the table with all the, the executive table. Well, now's the time. Like in the COVID era, HR has been front and center, because so much of what the organization has had to grapple with has been people related. And it just, has HR been up to the challenge in particular organizations? And some it has, some it hasn't. And I like to think that we're all up to the challenge, but the reality is we're not. And some people really are stuck in kind of the old traditions, the old way of doing things. And, we just need to get past that. It's completely understandable. It's a completely human reaction. And nobody likes change. Most human beings are naturally resistant to change. I get all of that. But one of the reasons why you've seen some organizations really excel and thrive in this environment, while others have really floundered, in large part, is just because of their approach to the people functions.
Right. Absolutely. I like how you mentioned that it was a fear-based mentality. I think there are a lot of organizations operating in that. And I think that also is rooted in the fact that HR in a lot of ways arose out of mitigating risk originally. And now we're kind of moving into an era where it's so much more than mitigating risk and just dealing with contracts. It's much more about creativity and engaging with people. And so many other colors have come into the profession. And I'm wondering, do you have any insight perhaps or advice to give someone who is working in a department that may be stuck in that fear-based mentality and wants to help move them out? Do you have any advice for maybe where they would start, or how they would help move their department into more of a perhaps creative or open mindset?
Yeah, I think part of it comes back to what's your sphere of influence. And so I can't really tell anyone what they should do. Everyone's context is different, right?
Right.
But look at your sphere of influence. If you're a leader of a team, regardless of what the organization is doing, whatever policies, practices, systems, structures are in place, however fear-based they may be as an institution, or what the predominant culture may be at the organization, in your team and within your sphere of influence, within your sphere of leadership, there's tons you can do each and every day to make it a positive environment for your people. And you can really be the mitigate, kind of that interference between some of the unhealthy stuff that might be happening at the institutional level, creating an environment so that your people actually don't know any different. They just think, oh, this is a great place to work. And in fact, there's tons of research on this. Most people either love or hate their job primarily because of the people they work with and their boss. And, when you look at other institution level factors and indicators, those don't play as big of a role usually, just because people kind of get into their little bubble and they are kind of insulated. For either better or for worse. They're either going to have a really crummy experience because they work with terrible people and a terrible boss, or they're going to have a really great experience because they work with great people and a great boss. And they might have to deal with other things outside their little team and deal with those frustrations from time to time. But largely, they're going to have a good experience if your team is a healthy, safe place. So focus on what you can do within your own sphere of influence for your team, because I think there's way more we can usually do than we think right off the bat. And if we're really proactive and strategic and just have conversations with our people and really try to develop meaningful relationships of trust and mutual accountability with our people, then I think much of what we're talking about, we'll be able to create that really healthy environment, at least within our team. And then on the other hand, I'm a big believer in looking for opportunities to speak up and to speak out. So within my team, I can certainly be proactive as I want to be, and try to be as positive as I can be within that team setting. But within the institution, if I'm noticing things that are unhealthy, or they're really questionable, or they're just fear-based tactics, or they're really, an over-reliance on compliance-based culture, or those sorts of things, I can speak out against those things. Now, how safe and secure do you feel in your job? I'm not going to tell you to speak out. That's a decision you're going to have to come up to on your own, depending on your family situation and your professional situation. But, I know for me that I'm in a situation where I'm fairly protected. And so if I want to speak out because I see something, I'm going to speak out, and I'm going to push as hard as I feel like I can push, and try to do it in an effective way so I can have as much impact as possible. But that's my approach. Right. Now, other people, will have to take a different approach. But ultimately, I think as long as we're thinking about it and aware of the context we find ourselves in, I think we have a better chance of making meaningful impact and creating at least that healthy environment within our smaller team.
Yes, I love that. I love how you mentioned focusing on your sphere of influence and what you can control, and that you iterated that there is a lot more that you can do than you think. I think sometimes HR directors or managers can feel a little bit locked in or stuck about what decisions they can make or what influence they can have, and just reassuring that just focus on your team, on the day-to-day interactions that you have, and that will have a ripple effect, I think, if you start there. So I like that.
And I also, just to reiterate, I do think it's important for people who feel like they can. I understand not everyone's situation is such, but if you feel like you're in a position of privilege where you can speak up, it's important that we speak up when we can.
Absolutely.
If we have a voice, use our voice and speak up for those who don't have a voice.
Right.
And clearly, sometimes that can negatively impact you potentially in your job or in your career. But I've also found, like, if I'm working with an organization where, good faith, making good faith efforts to move in the right direction, everyone's going to make mistakes. Everyone's going to fall on their face and get back up. So it's not a question of whether mistakes are made. It's a question of how you respond to the mistakes, right? And so if I see something and there's no attempt to respond to it, to fix it, to address it in a healthy way, that's when, I'm going to feel like I really need to speak up and push back And if people really, really resist that, or they retaliate against me because of that, that's probably not a place I'm going to be long-term. That's probably,
right.
I'm going to put an effort to be the change where I'm at up to a point, and then at some point it becomes unhealthy and I'm going to move on.
Right.
So as a leader, we need to we can do that calculus for ourselves within our current situation, or for members of our team as they're wrestling with those same types of things. But I would say, generally speaking, be bold, be brave, utilize your privilege, leverage your privilege to be a voice for those who don't have a voice. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership, the journey of becoming a truly remarkable leader. Early in my adult life, I learned about an Asian proverb that translates as bluer than indigo. If you think about the color indigo, it is a brilliant, deep, and vibrant blue, what some would call the bluest of blues. To have something that is bluer than indigo is rare and truly remarkable. Contrary to popular myth, there is no one-size-fits-all or cookie-cutter approach to effective leadership. There is no silver bullet, no secret sauce, no go-to model that will solve all of your problems. The truth is, great leaders have all had their unique strengths and flaws, and have all had to discover and then pave their own distinctive path in their life's journey to fulfill their leadership potential. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership will help you discover your own path and explore those ordinary, everyday actions that will help you respond to an uncertain future and produce extraordinary results for your individuals, teams, and organizations. The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership. Ordinary, everyday actions that produce extraordinary results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Academy. Courses, micro-credentials, and certificates to upskill and reskill for the future of work. All HCI Academy courses, micro-credentials, and certificates are designed, developed, and delivered by award-winning and internationally renowned scholars, educators, thought leaders, executives, and practitioners. Our courses, micro-credentials, and certificates will help you make your mark on the future of work and make an immediate impact in your organizations. Check out the HCI Academy and our many course offerings and certificates to upskill and reskill for the future of work. Check out our new weekly LinkedIn newsletter, Alchemizing Human Capital, exploring industry trends via original research and interviews with executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We look forward to having you join us.
That is great. Thank you for reiterating that point. I think that is extremely important. In the current market right now, there's a lot of people advocating for more pay for lots of different types of positions. And a lot of companies are feeling probably kind of a race to the top, or it's just a competition about who can pay more. What are your thoughts on how much pay is actually a key differentiator in jobs? And do you think that this matters to applicants as much as all of these companies racing to the top think it does? And perhaps if they can't be a part of that race, what are some other things that you think they could do?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I mean, don't get me wrong, pay is important, and you have to pay a fair, equitable wage. Right. Otherwise, it's a non-starter. Okay. So that's a given. That's kind of my base assumption, is pay a fair, equitable wage. And frankly, personally, I am a big believer in paying a living wage. And I believe that organizations should be looking for ways to keep up with inflation and try to pay the market rate.
Right. Absolutely.
But I get it. Like it's hard. Sometimes you're just lucky to keep your doors open and make payroll. Right. And so you may not feel like you're in the situation where you can bump people up. So what do? Now pay, there's tons of research on this. Pay in and of itself tends to not be a really great long-term motivator. Right. It can be an initial attraction point for a new person to come to your organization. So if they're comparing, pay or total compensation packages at various employers, that could be the differentiating factor. Should it be the differentiating factor? I would argue no. So if I'm interviewing for jobs, of course I want to know about their pay and their benefits package, but I want to know just as much, if not more, about their culture, their organizational structure, the way the job is designed, how much autonomy I'm going to have, like those sorts of things. As long as they're going to offer me a fair rate, it's those other things that are going to matter much more to me. And there's a lot of research that shows once the person's in the organization, again, giving them a little bit of a pay bump so that they don't feel like there's inequities or, there's misalignments with the market, that can be necessary and important, but it's largely all these other factors that are going to matter more than anything. So it comes back to that employee experience.
Right.
Do I get up in the morning excited to go to work with my team, to work with my colleagues? Do I have people that I trust and that I genuinely care about? Do we have an environment where we can create and innovate, where we can do really cool stuff, and where I'm going to have a chance to grow every day, grow more into my career, regardless of job title or like what my formal position is in the hierarchy? Can I continue to grow through the position that I'm in the organization? And if the answer is yes to all those questions, then I'm going to be much more willing to put up with a lagging pay rate. But if all those answers are no, and even if they're keeping up with pay, I'm probably going to be looking other places. And if all those answers are no, and they're not paying me well, I'm definitely looking other places.
Right. What do you think the future is for certain fields that may not be able to offer benefits like that, perhaps in maybe more blue collar jobs or monotonous tasks or even things like hospitality or food service? How do you see those industries adapting to compete for talent?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Now, I will say my bias is, and I'm a believer that you can create meaningful, purpose-driven and fulfilling work in all different types of organizations and all different types of jobs. And so I do think we often will talk about like these really creative, engaging jobs. Those are all the white collar, high tech jobs. And then you get into like blue collar or manual labor types of jobs. And those ones just innately are going to suck. And I actually don't believe that. I think we can have meaningful, purpose-driven, fulfilling work in a whole range of different types of jobs. And the labor force is spread out across all these different types of jobs. And so organizations should be paying attention to like, how can I design a meaningful work experience for everyone, regardless of whether you're an entry-level person working on the assembly line all the way on up. Now that said, I'm not, like, I totally recognize that there are certain types of jobs that's probably a little bit more of a challenge. And I've had plenty of those in my past. So, I mean, prior to getting into, finishing my education and becoming a professor and doing consulting work and stuff, I worked all the crummy jobs. I picked beans in a field. I worked in a factory. I worked in a couple of call centers. I worked retail. I've done all those types of jobs. And I know that, there's only so much you can get out of some of those. But I also know that, my experience there wasn't necessarily the same as those that I was working side by side with. So I'm thinking of one job. I worked for about 6 months saving up money to go to college at a factory. It was the best paying job I could find in the area. I was trying to save up tuition. And so I go and I work in this, and I constantly had my exit strategy in mind, right? Like I'm working 6 months, I'm earning money, I'm going to university, and then I'm never looking back. That's my whole mentality. But I'm working alongside people who worked there for 20 years and they liked it just fine. And so their kind of priorities and their salient motivators were different than mine. And so they were fine. And so part of it is just a values alignment between employer and job type and the people that you're trying to attract to the job. And like, what do they want? What do they need to get out of the job? What does fulfillment and purpose look like for your different people, right? Because it may be different for me than it is for you, or, whatever. But that's all of that said, you can definitely still improve the nature of most jobs in terms of things like task identity, skill variety, autonomy, purpose, and some of those types of things. So I'm a big believer in organizations doing whatever they can to try to improve the situation, and then just recognizing that it's not going to be for everyone. The other point I wanted to make in relation to this question actually comes back to what I was saying earlier about like AI, robotics, machine learning, automation. That's actually I know it's scary because we're talking about displacement of skills and tasks and even jobs and professions. But I mean, that's what we've seen at every stage of the Industrial Revolution. You have some new innovation, it displaces, it does something more efficiently, better, faster than a human being could do it. So now someone doesn't do that job anymore and they used to. And what do? They get reskilled or upskilled, they move on, they get a different type of job. And over time, what you see is the more monotonous, grinding types of work, it gets replaced by programs or robots or whatever.
Right.
And I think that's actually a good thing. That's a positive development for society as a whole, as long as people are willing to reskill and upskill, as long as they're willing to continually learn and develop themselves, so they're ready for the next types of work that they're going to need to do. There's always going to be a need for human beings doing meaningful, impactful work in organizations. There's only so much robots and AI and machine learning can do. But let all of that technology do all of the monotonous, mind-numbing stuff, which frees us up to do more creative things, more enlivening things. So that's kind of how I look at it.
I love the positive take on that. I think there is a lot of fear in that from a lot of people worrying about their jobs getting taken by AI, but you're so right. All it does is open up your time for learning more creative skills and for creating more jobs and more of a workforce need for those creative skills and those problem solving skills, those skills that involve so much more. What's the word?
The humanness of us, right?
Yes, right. That AI can't necessarily accomplish. I was reading this book recently. It's called Range, and it's about how the attitude used to be that specialization was the key. You want to get into one field and become really excellent in it, and that's how you're successful. And then this book kind of went through some case studies showing how actually diversifying your skills is more valuable, because AI can specialize in a lot of things, but it cannot do the problem solving, the creativity aspects that humans can across a bunch of different fields and concepts. And so I think that is kind of in that vein about how humans, there will always be a need, because humans can do that and AI cannot yet. I don't know where we're headed with AI in the future, but right now it cannot.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's different possible futures for like all this machine learning and AI.
Right.
I mean, one possible future is a really dystopian kind of Terminator kind of a future. That's certainly negative. We don't want the rise of the machines and them taking over everything, or like a Matrix kind of a future. But but kind of on the other end of the spectrum is you kind of have like this utopian Star Trek kind of a future that's enabled through technology. We're probably going to end up somewhere in the middle. So there's going to be pros and cons.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, if we're aware of those pros and cons, and then just try to leverage it, it really comes back to, what's our willingness to continually learn and grow and develop. If we're not very willing to do that, we're going to be very threatened by innovation and technologies. But if we're open to it, there's no real reason to be threatened by it, because it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to learn new things, get reskilled, and then do new, creative, interesting things that might be better than what we used to do. Just one small little example. So I do a lot of different things, but I'm a professor. And so one of the things that I have to do is I have to grade papers. Now, of all the things I do as a professor, my very least favorite thing to do is to grade papers. Now, I genuinely like to see the growth in students. I like to see the arc of their learning. Those types of things are meaningful and fulfilling. And I do like to be able to provide feedback that helps them to learn and grow. So that is meaningful. But frankly, I mean, reading a bunch of papers and providing, a lot of edits and comments and stuff, it's tedious. As much as I hope it's, it's important, it's necessary, it's tedious. Well, when I started my first year as a professor, I mean, really, even before I was a full-time professor, when I was teaching part-time, going back, I don't know, my first university class I ever taught was back in 2003. So I think back all the way back then, it was literally like people would turn in a paper and I would use a red pen and I would mark on it, right? And over time, it went to digital submissions. And over time, there's things like Turnitin where you can check for plagiarism. And like there's these other technologies that have made it an easier process. And now we're to the point where, if I'm providing comments on the substantive arguments of a paper, I still have to, put in those comments. But a lot of like the basic, more tedious things like spelling, grammar, some of those types of things, there's AI engines and other tools that provide students that feedback so that I don't have to spend half an hour, circling all the places they need to put a comma. Instead, I can focus on the actual substance of their argument and make suggestions or ask questions to point them in the right direction. Right. And so it's just an illustration of some of the more tedious stuff I used to have to do. I don't have to do as much anymore because technology can do that stuff, which frees me up to focus on the other stuff that's actually going to be more impactful and a better use of my time and my education, my ability to help the students. And we can extrapolate from that, my one little experience, across all different types of jobs. We're going to see the same type of thing over time. So as long as we can lean into it and learn how to use the technology, I think it's going to really enhance our work life.
Absolutely. I love how you said lean into it. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about HR in general, operating from a fear-based standpoint or a growth and opportunity standpoint, leaning into all this change, leaning into the upheaval of the workforce and the disruption, and seeing it as an opportunity to really become a strategic asset within your organization by bringing new ideas to the table and by innovating. So I think that was a great example. Thank you. What do you think? So we've talked a little bit about how it's really important for organizations to create value beyond just the pay, obviously, and also about employee experience. What are the ways that you think in a company's recruitment and talent acquisition process that they can effectively communicate that to people? I mean, obviously there's the job ad, which a lot of companies are still very employer focused on the job ad, right? It's more of a job description. It doesn't make a case about why anyone should work for them. But I think it's kind of harder to advertise like an overall general descriptive, like here's the feeling and essence of what it's like to work for us. You know what I mean? I feel like that's harder to communicate. Do you have any advice on how you can get that out there?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And many organizations really struggle with this. And so you essentially have a job description that's the job advertisement,
right?
Which it's nice to have a good, thorough job description. Don't get me wrong. Many organizations don't even have that. And so, someone comes in, they feel like either there's been a bait and switch, like they were recruited for one type of job and now they took the job and now they're doing something different. That happens. That happened to me before. That's super frustrating. So that kind of thing happens. It's nice to have a good, clear job description. But yeah, the job posting needs to clarify organizational values in a way, because what you're going for when you're trying to line up applicants in your pool for a particular position, again, assuming you actually know what the position is, what you need the person to do. That's not always a safe assumption because many organizations actually
right.
don't do job analysis. They don't actually know what they need, but let's assume that's all in place, right? Let's assume that. And if you have all that in place, like, yes, you need knowledge, skills, and abilities. You need the certain competencies that someone can bring so they can be effective in the job. But you're looking for values alignment. And particularly in this day and age, you're looking for person-organization fit, person-job fit, and values congruency between the applicant and the role. And so you need to be clear-eyed about what the core values of the organization are. What are you actually really trying to accomplish? And I see organizations get this wrong all the time, where, they have their mission, their vision statements, they have their values. It's on the website. There's a big banner or a big sign, and everyone can say them, but is it actually embedded into the culture of the organization? Is it embedded throughout the different, experiences and the mechanisms of the organization? And very often it's not. And so you'll end up having a completely inconsistent message between what the organization says its values are, what they're going for, what they really want to see from an, potential future employee versus what's actually communicated in the job posting. And so then of course you're going to get worse fitting applicants. Recruiters are going to have a harder time figuring out who would be a good fit. Applicants are going to have a harder time trying to figure out who's going to be a good fit. And then you look at the search committee or the hiring manager, whoever's trying to actually sift through all the applicants, trying to figure out who we should actually hire. They're not terribly clear on what they're actually looking for or what would be a good fit in terms of values, congruence, and alignment. Right. And so it's no wonder that you have so many poor hires. And it's, sometimes it's a poor hire because someone conveys on their resume or they're able to snow people in the interview that they have skills and abilities that they don't actually have, and they get in the job and they can't do it. And that doesn't work. Right. But more often than not, when it doesn't really work, when it's a poor hire, it's because that values congruence isn't there, because what matters to me as an individual and as a employee in terms of motivations and engagement and meaning, purpose, fulfillment, it's not the same things that the organization values or the way the job is even designed. And so then of course it's going to be ill-fitting, and we're going to be frustrated on both sides. So what we really need to pay attention to when we're crafting those job announcements is be really clear on what core values you want. Communicate those values, communicate the culture. There are compelling ways to communicate culture and to communicate, that you really want, a psychologically safe and inclusive culture, for example. Communicate that in the job posting. But more than that, you have to then communicate it throughout the applicant experience. So we've talked about employee experience. Let's talk about the holistic human experience in conjunction with the organization. And if you say you value all these things, but then I apply for a job and I never hear back, does that, and you say you're a people-centric organization, is that consistent with what you say is important versus what my experience is, that you don't seem to care about me or my time enough to even reach out and send an email or something, right? Or I go in for an interview and you just have a really negative experience, or whatever, right? Or all the way through the job offer and the onboarding. Do you actually have consistent experiences that are aligned with the job posting and the values that you state and the culture that you state? And if you don't, people are going to get frustrated, and word of mouth is going to spread, and people are, going to vote with their feet.
I think it's so important to talk about applicant experience because I think a lot of employers haven't, like employee experience, they haven't had to worry about that as much. And so their applicant experience plan, or whatever you want to call it, is very ad hoc, right? It's not super intentional. They don't have consistent onboarding practices. They don't intentionally think about how can I make this interview a good experience for the applicant, right? They're more worried about how do I get the information I need out of the applicant and not being intentional about crafting a positive experience. And I think now that the tables have turned, we do need to be so much more intentional about not just trying to get applicants in the door, but how do we treat them throughout the entire experience so we don't get ghosted, or so that they show up for work after they're hired, because I know that that's a big problem right now.
It
yeah,
is.
People are ghosting people and not even showing up for work. So
and on the one hand, I feel for organizations that are struggling. They have all these open positions. They're trying to get people. They're having a hard time getting a good pool. They make a hire and then the person doesn't even show up. I really feel for the organization on the one hand. On the other hand, I think that's probably indicative of the experience of the applicant. Right. And sometimes people will just be jerks. And so, you can always leave it to people to find new creative ways to be jerks at times. But most people, I think, are trying to do right by others. And they, if they are treated well, even if they end up deciding to go to a different job, because in the interim between when they get the offer and they are going to start, they get a better offer. If I was treated well, most people are going to reach out to the organization and say, thank you for the offer. I really appreciate it, but I got this other offer. I'm going to take it, and at least have that professional courtesy. And so when people don't even do that, it tells me most of the time I suspect that it was just a pretty crummy applicant experience and they were kind of taken for granted. And so now, I still would advocate for professional courtesy, but I kind of get it. I understand why someone might do that. And so, yeah, let's pay attention to the whole experience. And you said something a minute ago that I think is important. A lot of times hiring managers or search committees, they're not intentional enough about creating a positive experience. I'll flip that around and I'll say, I don't think most of the time that hiring managers or search committees are intentionally trying to create a bad experience. I think most of the time they're trying to do a good job, but it's not something they've really paid all that much attention to. And so they're kind of fumbling around, and they don't, because they're not paying enough attention to it, they just let things go that shouldn't be let go. They skip steps, or they don't do the common courtesy things that anyone should do in order to make sure that people have a good positive experience. So even if I don't get the job, I get it. There's lots of people applying to lots of different jobs, and maybe I'm not the best fit for whatever reason. If I apply though, and I put the time into a meaningful application, just like I'm putting in professional courtesy towards them, I would like to get that back. And even though I'm not going to work for them right now because they didn't offer me the job, who's to say that I won't try again later, or that they won't need me or want me later? And so you're really shooting yourself in the foot if you're not being proactive about that up front.
Absolutely.
Recognizing, again, usually there's not malicious intent. There's not people trying to be jerks or trying to make a bad experience for people. Most of the time it's just, kind of ignorance or inexperience, or just not paying proper attention to it. So we can be generous with people that way, but that's not an excuse. We still should be paying attention to it.
Right. It's just an unintentional result most of the time of them not making a real plan for that experience. Well, we are coming up here on time, John. And so I want to end here with this one question. If you had a piece of advice to give a very overwhelmed HR department of one, what would that be?
An overwhelmed HR department of one, practice self-care. You can't be all things to all people all the time. That's a really hard place to be in right now. HR is a hard place to be in right now anyways, because we're always talking about, show empathy and compassion and caring towards your people, be people-centric, right? And I agree with all that. I think that's all super important. And a lot of times in a lot of organizations that ends up falling on the HR department to try to push that and to support that. Right. Who's supporting the HR person? And if you only have one person who's trying to be the voice for all of this and pushing the initiatives, and it's just, it's like pushing that big rock up the hill. And it seems like, sometimes one step forward, two steps back, who's looking out for them, for their well-being, for their mental health, and for burnout and those sorts of things. So I would just say to the HR department of one, you got to look out for yourself, practice self-care, pick your battles, and you can't be all things to all people. You can't win them all. And so, be strategic and take care of yourself so that you don't get burned out and don't get overwhelmed.
That's great advice. Thank you. I love that. Well, thank you so much, John, for all of your comments and your insight. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I think there's been some real value in it. And is there anything else that you would like to say, or any comments that you have before we end here?
Just, I think it's a really exciting time. I think, it's a challenging time to be sure, but it's an exciting time for organizations and for employees to reinvent themselves and to create more healthy workplace environments. And the future of work, I'm bullish and I'm quite optimistic. I think, while there's, tons of unforeseen things, and there's definitely the possibility of a lot of negative things happening, I think these technological innovations are going to push us in a more positive direction. And I think overall that organizations are going to have to learn how to adapt in order to attract and retain good people. So I think what that means for organizations and for the labor force and the experience in the workplace overall, I think is going to notch us up the right direction for a net positive. And so I'm excited to see all of that. It's a challenging time to keep up with pay. So if you're struggling with that, do everything you can, because you got to keep up with inflation, and you got to keep up with pay so it's equitable. But focus on those other things around the employee experience. And if you can do that and have meaningful relationships with your people, I think you'll still be able to attract and retain good people and have a good quality work life for them. So that would be my call to anyone listening. And it's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, John. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. Check out Human Capital Innovations magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine with the mission to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We publish issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Take a look at the latest issue and let us know what you think. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership, the journey of becoming a truly remarkable leader. Early in my adult life, I learned about an Asian proverb that translates as bluer than indigo. If you think about the color indigo, it is a brilliant, deep, and vibrant blue, what some would call the bluest of blues. To have something that is bluer than indigo is rare and truly remarkable. Contrary to popular myth, there is no one-size-fits-all or cookie-cutter approach to effective leadership. There is no silver bullet, no secret sauce, no go-to model that will solve all of your problems. The truth is, great leaders have all had their unique strengths and flaws, and have all had to discover and then pave their own distinctive path in their life's journey to fulfill their leadership potential. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership will help you discover your own path and explore those ordinary, everyday actions that will help you respond to an uncertain future and produce extraordinary results for your individuals, teams, and organizations. Check out Human Capital Innovations magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine with the mission to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We publish issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Take a look at the latest issue and let us know what you think. The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership. Ordinary, everyday actions that produce extraordinary results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations podcast? Please subscribe, leave a review, comment, share, and consider supporting the podcast on Patreon, even at the producer and sponsorship levels. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership, the journey of becoming a truly remarkable leader. Early in my adult life, I learned about an Asian proverb that translates as bluer than indigo. If you think about the color indigo, it is a brilliant, deep, and vibrant blue, what some would call the bluest of blues. To have something that is bluer than indigo is rare and truly remarkable. Contrary to popular myth, there is no one-size-fits-all or cookie-cutter approach to effective leadership. There is no silver bullet, no secret sauce, no go-to model that will solve all of your problems. The truth is, great leaders have all had their unique strengths and flaws, and have all had to discover and then pave their own distinctive path in their life's journey to fulfill their leadership potential. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership will help you discover your own path and explore those ordinary, everyday actions that will help you respond to an uncertain future and produce extraordinary results for individuals, teams, and organizations. The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership. Ordinary, everyday actions that produce extraordinary results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life. Check out Human Capital Innovations magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine with the mission to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We publish issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Take a look at the latest issue and let us know what you think. Check out our new weekly LinkedIn newsletter, Alchemizing Human Capital, exploring industry trends via original research and interviews with executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We look forward to having you join us.